This is Hear Me Out. I'm Celeste Headley. We come to you in the midst of the 2024 Olympic Games. So far, we have seen record-breaking athletic performances, amazing sights from the beautiful city of Paris, and staggering TV viewership numbers. The opening ceremonies drew 41.5 million viewers, basically doubling the numbers from the last Summer Games, which were in Tokyo. It's hard not to feel a twinge or maybe a surge of patriotism when the athletes we send to compete do well. That's even more the case for host nations, as we'll find out soon enough when the Summer Games come to LA in 2028. But if you peel back the spectacle, the pride, the history, and just the sheer impressiveness of it all, you might find some stuff that's pretty ugly. So are the Olympics really a force for peace and unity, or is that just what the International Olympic Committee wants us to believe?
When you take a look around at kind of the path of destruction created by the Olympic Games, I think most people don't even know what's happening, first of all, or that it has happened.
MacIntosh Ross joins Hear Me Out to show us the dark underbelly of the Olympic Games. Stay with us.
This episode is brought to you by Michelob Ultra. Michelob Ultra is perfect for more than just the summer heat this year, because not only is it refreshing and crisp with only 95 calories, but Ultra is also the official beer sponsor of Team USA at the Olympic Games Paris 2024. Celebrate every point, race, and moment with Team USA and Michelob Ultra for the Olympic Games Paris 2024. Stock up on Michelob Ultra and cheer on Team USA. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2024 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Welcome back to Hear Me Out. I'm Celeste Headley. Most of you probably know the Olympics began as a series of ancient Greek festivals. The Greek Empire at that time, founded by Alexander the Great, was massive, stretching up into Europe, south to Egypt, east into Asia. The Pan-Hellenic Games brought together athletes from factions of Greece that would otherwise have been at odds. And it was all in the name of healthy competition, right? Many of the events at the early games are still seen in modern Olympics. Sprints, long and high jumps, throwing various things, riding horses. But the ancient games were also pretty brutal. Pancration was essentially a savage physical fight. The only things you were not allowed to do were bite and gouge someone's eyes. According to the Met Museum, an athlete named Sostratos was called Fingertips because he routinely began matches by breaking his opponent's fingers. Now, obviously, that's not okay in modern Olympics, but some argue there is a through line of brutality in these games in terms of displacing people, dictatorial governance, and even environmental impact. So what is the real significance of the Olympics? Is it healthy competition and global unity? Or is it a humanitarian disaster? Our guest is MacIntosh Ross. He's a writer and instructor of kinesiology at the University of Windsor. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And for those who don't know you, maybe you could tell us what you do.
So I primarily study the intersection of sports and human rights, which has inevitably led me down the path to studying the Olympic Games.
And for those who do not know what kinesiology is, it is broadly writ the study of human movement, and fittingly, it comes from the Greek root of kinesis, which just, I think, means just movement. But as I understand it, the possibly unpopular opinion that you bring to us today is that the Olympics are fascist, essentially.
Well, they're not good. They constantly cause harm to host populations, and usually the most marginalized populations. So in France, this time around, it was largely unhost folks, or especially in France and neighboring countries, if they decide to host the Olympic Games, refugees right now are in the crosshairs of organizers who are trying to move them out of the way, so they're not in the line of the camera's view, to try to make their cities look as polished and modern as possible. And it's all very superficial and constructed for a very short period of time. And it seems deeply flawed and wrong.
So how is that different from all of the other big events that cities host, like the Super Bowl or the World's Fair or any of the massive Eurovision, for example, these massive competitions? Don't they do the same thing?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if Eurovision does this. because of my focus on sport, I tend to focus more on other sporting events, and to some degree, it happens at smaller sporting events. But just the scale and the amount of investment involved in the Olympic Games has led it down some pretty shady pathways.
So I want to read what the IOC says is the goal of these games. They say it is to place sport at the service of harmonious development of humankind with a view to promoting a peaceful society concerned with the preservation of human dignity. And I would imagine that an IOC official would say that in terms of promoting a peaceful society, allowing for competition that is sportsmanlike in nature between countries that may be at odds, like the U.S. and China or the U.S. and Russia, is actually helping in terms of diplomacy. Do you buy that?
It might be. It could, on some minute level, be helping. I don't think that sports are going to be what brings the world together, though. When you take a look around at kind of the path of destruction created by the Olympic Games, I think most people don't even know what's happening, first of all, or that it has happened. So in 1968, for example, in Mexico City, the police literally shot peaceful protesters, hundreds of them, before the Olympic Games because they were saying things like, we want bread, not circuses. Like, why are you holding Olympic Games if we can't feed our population? And that was successfully covered up for quite a long time, or at least minimized, where they said the protesters were not peaceful. They were very angry, dangerous protesters. But it turns out they were unarmed and they were surrounded by the police and killed. But what got back to America and to Canada and other countries in the press was, there was this kind of hiccup with protesters who were very violent, but the government suppressed it, and away you go. And then 20 years later, in 1988, over 700,000 people lost their homes just to hold the Olympic Games. Like that. The fact that people don't know that, but they know, for example, that Ben Johnson tested positive for steroids at the 1988 Olympic Games, I think shows how fundamentally flawed our view of sport and our relationship with sport is.
And just so people know, the 88 Summer Olympics were held in Seoul in South Korea. Go ahead.
Yeah, so over in South Korea, Ben Johnson tested positive for steroids, lost his gold medal, came back. We had a commission in Canada to get to the bottom of what was morally wrong with Canadian sport because we had this individual test positive for steroids, but we didn't have a commission to understand what was morally wrong with Canadian sport, that we're sending athletes to the Olympic Games where the citizens of host cities are consistently bombarded by horrific circumstances.
So, again, taking the view of, maybe a government official, they might say that you have to weigh the pros against the cons, that, yes, there is pain in the short term. But, for example, the 2018 Winter Games, which were in South Korea, had a $55 million surplus because of tourism that they then invested in different sports around the country. The 2016 games in Rio had a global audience of 5 billion, and more than 56% of foreign visitors were new visitors to Brazil. They set tourism records there with $6.2 billion coming in. You'd see, England when they hosted them. I think that was 2012. Yeah. They said they had more than one visitor every second over the course of the Olympics, and they spent $2.5 billion just in 1 month. So, I can see how someone would say, yeah, in the long term, we're bringing in tourism, we're bringing in money to the country that we can use to benefit our citizens.
Yeah, and that's often what they'll fall back on, the host city committees, the IOC, that, this is going to open up some kind of future that is more lucrative, particularly with respect to tourism. But I think that what we lose sight of is the people who are being most negatively impacted by the Olympic Games are not folks who are going to be tourists. They're folks who desperately need social assistance from their countries and often aren't getting it because the money that would be used or could be used for social assistance is being funneled into hosting these massive spectacles, which may or may not in the long run have a positive impact. on a city or a nation. In Rio, for example, the other side of the coin is that they went in and knocked down tons of slums where people had lived, people had communities, families, and just basically bulldozed them and told them, you don't live here anymore, go find somewhere new. That's heart-wrenching. And it happened in different ways in different places as well, where it seems like if it's not a community that meets some kind of standard that the middle class or higher has determined is reflective of the society they want to have, regardless if they created the realities that have produced those communities in the first place, they see them as expendable.
I mean, all of that is horrific. And of course, there have been very credible evidence of slave labor being used, not just in Brazil, but in the Middle East and to build, in some cases, the very places where the media was staying. On the other hand, there have been studies that show that a country becomes, being a host country increases the host nation's openness, both substantively and permanently. In other words, they start getting invited to all these big global organizations, right? And so liberalization of politics in Korea coincided with that bid to host the 1988 Summer Games. Tokyo joined the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, because of the 1964 Summer Games, right? And we saw the same thing with Italy in 1960 joining the United Nations. So there's also this benefit that is political and also in terms of how open the politics are, and in some cases liberal.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially the Korean example, because that's one that the IOC really likes to fall back. So if you go to their website, if you go to any kind of documentation put out there by the IOC or the book written by former IOC member, I believe, Dick Pound from Canada, they'll say, look, the Olympics brought democracy to South Korea. Well, yeah, kind of. It coincided, at least. It probably didn't hurt the quest for democracy. But when they were awarded the games in 1981, South Korea was run by dictators. And during the period between 81 and 88, the dictators just clamped down on protest and resistance in very violent, bloody ways that are left out of the narrative of how South Korea got to a point of democracy. And the other interesting thing is protesters and the student resistance in South Korea was almost an obstacle to be overcome. And it was very worrying for the IOC. But at the same time, what I expected to read was that the students actually were at the forefront of the push for democracy that in the end made the Olympics look pretty good. They're the ones on the street fighting against the military, losing their lives leading up to the Olympic Games. And then eventually, yes, there is this shift over to a democratically organized government. But leading up to that, I mean, it was horrific. And some of the things that happened that still don't get much attention, even though the Associated Press has at least dug into it a little bit and started to show what you can possibly show. It's a little bit difficult, but Brothers Home, for example, it was a place where they rounded up undesirable children, and basically the things that went on there, rape, murder, this is all part of that story that, if you go over to the IOC website and you click on 1988 in Seoul, none of that's going to be there. That's just noise around the eventual coming of the games and democracy. But it was an awful period.
So we have to take a break, but we're going to continue this conversation in just a moment. We're talking to Mac Ross about whether or not the Olympic Games are autocratic and harmful to humanity. And we'll continue this conversation in just a moment. I'm Celeste Headley. Stay with us.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
There's a lot that could impress you about the all-new Honda Prologue EV. True, it's got class-leading passenger space and clean, thoughtful design and intuitive technology. But what really sets the Prologue apart from the competition is that it's more than an EV. It's a Honda. Honda, the power of dreams. Visit honda.com/prologue to learn more.
And we're back. This is Hear Me Out, a podcast from Slate. And we're talking today about the Olympic Games. Are they a net positive or a net negative for humankind? And with us is Mac Ross, who says they're essentially fascist. And I have to assume anytime that word comes up in connection with the Olympic Games, Mac, everyone thinks of course, Hitler and the games in Germany overseen by the Nazi regime. I have seen that argument a lot, that they can be used for propaganda, but are the Nazis kind of trotted out as the worst possible scenario? I mean, maybe that's used too much, that extreme example.
Yeah, I don't think calling the games fascist does justice to the complexities of the problems that we face through the Olympic Games necessarily. But you're right. People go back to the 1936 Berlin Olympics when they really want to find an example of something that went horrifically wrong. So basically what happened was the Olympic Games were awarded to Berlin, but they were awarded pre-Hitler, pre the Nazis coming to power. And the Nazis inherited the Olympic Games as they were coming up. And initially, Hitler didn't really see any value in them. He thought they were silly and it was a waste of time. And obviously, he had grand plans to take over Europe. And it was the people around him who said, this could be a massive propaganda coup for our regime. It kind of showed him what could be done through the Olympic Games. And that's when you get these grand displays of Nazi propaganda through the streets, the torch relay being used, the videoing, videotaping, I guess we'd call it taping back then, filming of the Olympic Games to be then kind of trotted out and shown to everybody to say, look how powerful we are, look how organized we are. And the other thing they did was they really focused on trying to convince foreign dignitaries that there was nothing to see here. We're just going to hold a really great games. Everybody's going to have a good time. So people went back to Canada, went back to the United States and said, there's nothing to see there. Nothing going on. It was a great event. Pierre de Coubertin said it was a great event for the founder of the modern Olympic Games. And of course, we know what happened a few years later is World War II broke out because of Hitler, the Nazis. So he wasn't a peace-loving, sports-loving fellow. He knew what he was doing, and he was setting up a massive distraction and kind of a goodwill campaign for his regime.
Okay, but on the other hand, you also, one of the things most people remember besides the Nazis about those games was the incredible performance by Jesse Owens, winning 4 gold medals there and really kind of shaming Hitler in a way and disproving the the Aryan superiority myth, lie. And people might say that's one of the things the Olympics can do. Even though they were punished for it, everybody remembers Tommy Smith and John Carlos raising their fists at the 1968 Olympics. And there's a lot of people who would say that part of the power of the Olympics is that there's a global stage, sometimes for underrepresented minorities, sometimes for people who can break stereotypes. The very first gold medal for the Philippines went to a woman in powerlifting. Right? So how much value for you is there in that?
There's tremendous value, but we put so much pressure on the athletes to carry out those acts of resistance, right? When maybe, they shouldn't have to deal with that. That shouldn't come down to them. But they do. And you're right. Some of the most powerful displays of resistance and support in modern history have come through the Olympic Games. But also, I would say it revealed the realities as well. And maybe this is part of the power of it, of sport, and especially during Jesse Owens' time, amateur sport, because he came back to the United States and famously, tried to make some money off of what he had done. He said, okay, I'm won all these gold medals. I'm ready to make money. Let me go perform for, gate receipts and things like that. And they said, oh, no, whoa, up there. No, you can't make any money off this. He turned around and said, well, I can't eat gold medals, can I? And that was kind of the reality. In Canada, we had a similar situation where one of our figure skaters was gifted a car and she had to give it back. And it started to really show the disconnect between the nationalism that was going on and the expectations that were being laid on athletes' shoulders and the exploitation that was happening. You're getting them all the way to the Olympic Games. They're getting themselves to the Olympic Games as well. Some countries are better funded than other countries. They're showing up. They're doing what you ask them to do. They're winning. And then when they come back, there's nothing for them. And of course, Jesse Owens, all of that was compounded by Jim Crow laws. It was compounded by racism throughout America. So to keep amateurism on top of that, it was really, I think, it showed all the problems in the system as it was set up and helped to begin the process, at least, of renegotiating what it meant to be an Olympic athlete. Because of Jesse Owens, after what he did in 1936 and the headlines he made, couldn't live off of his accomplishments, then what are we doing?
Then, there's also not just an individual point of pride, right? But there is measurable increases in national pride when somebody has a good performance. The very moving haka performed by the women's rugby team from New Zealand. They said that, especially in some of the, non-dominant countries, like important to their national, say that they're important to their national pride. Kenya, the Philippines, Turks. We saw video of after Pyeongchang, the Winter Games there, of people dancing in the street, mass quantities of people dancing in the streets, right? So there is this, at least within nations, when someone performs well in the Olympics, there is this common pride in their country. How much is that worth to you?
I think that can be very valuable, especially the way the Olympics are set up. So we talk a lot about fairness and equity in sport. The reality is sports are, first of all, inherently unfair. Some people have advantages that other people don't. The heavyweight boxing, for example, if you're really tall, you have a very big advantage over a heavyweight. It's very short. But it also comes down to economics and the ability to finance Olympic teams and train athletes, the reality on the ground of, the day-to-day lives of people. So the United States of America has won a colossal amount of medals at the Olympic Games. Other countries have won almost none. And so when you actually win a medal against a powerhouse like Russia or China or the United States of America, that's a massive accomplishment because, they don't typically have, if it's a country in the global South, for example, access to the kind of facilities, the sport medicine, the training, everything that goes on, particularly in the United States, to really be on a even playing field. Is not even. They're already starting to some degree quite a ways back and still finding a way to win. I can see why you would celebrate in the streets. It's an incredible accomplishment.
But
Yep.
Go ahead. I knew there was a but coming. I was just going to prompt it.
Yeah. So we've had a giant. I don't know how much this is registered in the United States, although I know the States has had some of this itself with abuse in sports and things like that going on, corruption, mismanagement. Up in Canada, we've really struggled with Hockey Canada and our Soccer Canada, or Canada Soccer. I can't remember which one you say. But again, I think a lot of us were watching to see what was going to happen with our women's soccer team, because they have performed really well at the Olympics. They're gold medalists. And again, we looked on as more cheating, corruption, mismanagement. We were docked 6 points. Our coach was sent home. It's just pandemonium all the time, and it's embarrassing. So the degree to which, sport has the potential to make a country proud, up in Canada, I say up because we're just north of the United States. I feel like we're seeing the other side of it for the last year and a half, where sport has really not been something to be proud of. Our organizations are not something to be proud of. The athletes are. The athletes are doing the best they can under the circumstances. But the exploitation, abuse, corruption that has unfolded in Canada, or at least, I guess, been noted now and brought to light, whereas before it was just going on behind the scenes, I guess, has made a lot of Canadians hesitant, I think, to even care about the Olympics.
We have to take another quick break, but we'll continue this conversation in just a moment, because there's more to be said, I think. We're here with Mac Ross. This is Hear Me Out, and we'll be back.
Summer is supposed to be an opportunity to slow down, but when you look at your kids, you can't help but notice that your kids are growing up fast. Help them build independence as they grow with Greenlight. Greenlight is a debit card and money app for families, where parents can keep an eye on kids' money habits while kids learn how to save, invest, and spend wisely. It's the easy, convenient way to raise financially smart kids. Get your first month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/Spotify.
How do you feel great on vacation? Like really good? Easy. You go to Aruba. You'll spend your time relaxing on cool white sand beaches and floating in healing blue water. You'll immerse yourself in natural wonder and find your center on an island where things move at your speed. You won't just feel great, you'll feel relaxed, renewed, and ready for life. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your trip at aruba.com.
Hello again, I'm Celeste Headley. This is Hear Me Out, and I'm talking today about the Olympics. Good or evil? With Mac Ross. And Mac Ross says, on balance, when you add up the whole tally sheet, they're more on the evil side than the good side. But let's talk a little bit about what I think we can both agree on, which is the greatness of the athletes. Because, right, there is that thrill of a world record, right? There's that thrill of seeing what the body is capable of. And, part of this fact that the athletes, at least for the time that they're competing, have a global stage, a global microphone, makes it even more powerful. I'm thinking in particular Simone Biles and her very public discussions about mental health and the need to step away, which I don't think she would have been gotten anywhere near as much attention were she not competing in the Olympics. But then this year, when you watched her, just incredible that a body is capable of that a human body is capable of that, knowing what she's gone through made it that much more meaningful to me. What do you make of that? And some of these athletes, you're right, it costs a lot of money to compete in the Olympics. But some of the athletes, like I'm thinking about the IOC's effort to have a refugee team, right? Some of them do get philanthropic dollars and come from very poor places in the world, poor families, and compete. Even if they don't win, they compete on an international stage.
Yeah, exactly. International stage. The refugee team is really interesting to me because to some extent it unveils some of the contradictions within the Olympic movement, where, they say we don't want to be political. We're not political to some degree. They'll say, no, not to some degree. They do say we're not political. We're apolitical. We don't engage in politics. But then, you have the refugee team, which is open to anybody who has gone through the UN refugee process successfully. But then what about all the nations that the IOC is very close with that basically don't allow there to be refugees? I'm thinking specifically of China, where you can't get out. So you're allowing the Chinese state to host the Olympic Games. You're sending a refugee team, but there can't be refugees, or very few refugees from China. And I would suspect that very few athletes who got out who were a refugee would ever risk going back in to compete, in part because it's very well documented around the world what happens, even not outside of China. So in Canada, we had an individual named Hussein Chalil, who was visiting his wife's family in Uzbekistan. He had UN status as a refugee. He left, he come to Canada, and he was arrested abroad and sent back, and he's still in prison. He's been there for over a decade in China. So I understand the potential of the refugee team and maybe the intent of the refugee team, but I think it's important that we remain critical about some of these initiatives that the IOC is rolling out, and how they can be more all-encompassing, especially given, like you said at the top of the show, the very grand humanitarian statements that the IOC says and rolls out. These initiatives need to be consistent with that.
I mean, we only have a few minutes left, so I have to ask this question, which is, why is it specifically the Olympics' fault? I mean, I get it because we're talking about a scale that is larger than almost any other sporting event. That makes perfect sense to me. But on the other hand, all of these negative things that you said could be on a smaller scale said about the Super Bowl, right? The Super Bowl is also often an environmental catastrophe. And I get it. The Super Bowl, just like the IOC, has tried to take steps, but it's still a net negative for the environment. It's still very expensive for whoever the host city is, the United States. You're Canadian, so let me explain. The Super Bowl is I'm just kidding. They do displace people. They remove homeless people from streets so that when all those cameras are coming down, taking shots before the Super Bowl, you're not seeing them. I mean, can't all of these things be said about big sporting events in general?
Just not to the same scale as the Olympics, I think. And any event, I think some degree of this is going to happen. I guess the hope is that they'll take, and by they I mean the IOC, they'll take steps to mitigate the damage that is being done. And there seems to be a gap there, where the IOC likes to have the ability to point to the host committee and say, oh, no, it's the host committee. It's all up to them. We have nothing to do with this. We just roll in the sports and we leave. And so as long as that gap continues to exist, I don't know how serious they can get about this, because there's surely options. You could hold the Olympics in recurring places. You don't have to move it every single time. So you don't have to build anything new. You could hold the Olympics all over the world at one time. So have track in one place, use the best facilities available wherever they happen to be. Don't build all new facilities all the time. And now recently we're seeing facilities built in places that are, in terms of climate, not really meant for that. So just stop. We can still have the Olympic Games, but we can do them in a far more sustainable way for humanity and the environment. And turn it into something that maybe we can be proud of and celebrate. And, we don't have to keep leaning on athletes to protest and mount resistance and having to constantly try to get the IOC to address some of the harms that have been perpetrated in the past in the name of the Olympic Games. Just in some vague hope that we can prompt some change down the road.
Okay, so what do you, I mean, again, this is one of those things where I can't fully disagree with you because you're an expert and I am not. I just like watching.
Very good.
But also I feel like it's not that you're not wrong, right? This is all true. It's just a question of which things people are prioritizing, right? So if someone is out there feeling bad because they love watching the Olympics, what would you say to them? Should they stop watching?
Not necessarily. I mean, you can make your voice heard. You can join movements that try to make it better. There's all kinds of different things you can do to try to improve the Olympic Games and put pressure on Olympic organizers. The Olympics is so massive that it's hard to avoid when it's on. And I feel guilty when I catch a glimpse of the Olympics here and there sometimes. But we also can't look away. If you look away, we're in trouble as well. And that's the kind of double-edged sword we're faced with. I think it's important to engage in things and remain critical of them without just kind of going silent. But there's something about sport that changes the way we engage, I think. Because so many of us participate in sport at some level, we have an irrational attachment to sport that we don't have to other things. So, massive trade shows and things like that, we don't really get as hung up and obsessed with as we do the Olympic Games. And I don't think it would cause the same kind of crisis of conscience to disengage from those things as it does the Olympic Games. And there's something to be said that, we have been participating in physical activity and contests since, like you said, well before the Greek period, back into Mesopotamia. We've always done this. So it means something to humanity, and it obviously is very important to people that we do it right and do it in a sustainable way.
Okay, that is MacIntosh Ross. He is an instructor of kinesiology at the University of Windsor. Mac, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
When this show airs, there will be about 5 days left until the closing ceremonies for the 2024 Olympic Games. That's plenty of time for you to collect your thoughts, stew a little on what you heard from Mac, and let us know what you think. Drop us a line and give us your opinion. It's hearmeout@slate.com. Now, last week we had H. Alan Scott with us. He argued about the political power of the modern pop star. It was a pretty timely conversation. A lot of you had some great thoughts to share with us. So before we go, let's share one of your emails. And this came to us from a listener named Anna. Anna wrote this: "The impact of pop stars' endorsements is less about coolness and more about likability. It's different to favorability, which is tied to policy positions, but likability as a person. The brand association of a pop star endorsement can be huge. Likability is an important metric in electability, especially for women candidates who have to counteract sexist narratives tied to female political ambition and leadership. Charli XCX, Beyonce, Taylor Swift all have the potential to deliver points for candidates' likability scores among their fans. For anyone who's less politically engaged or literate, liking a candidate or not is as good a reason as any to support them. Just ask Trump voters who love Trump but can't articulate or argue for his policies. Finally, since we're talking about brands, let's frame all of this via the marketing funnel. Pop star endorsements are smashing it out of the park for awareness, and the likability factor, you could say, aids consideration. I'll stop short of saying they have much impact in actually converting final votes, unless they're literally standing at the polls on election day. Boy, that would work, Anna. But that's the Democrats' job anyway. Anna, I want to thank you very, very much. I wonder if Anna works in politics, because many of those things that you mentioned are not widely known, but they are known by people in politics. For example, for our listeners, Americans are perfectly willing to vote for a male candidate they don't like. They are not at all willing to vote for a female candidate that is not likable in their view. On the other hand, the problem is the things that make a woman candidate likable are the very things that make them less likely to be seen as leaders. So likability that's tough. Anyhow, we always want to get your take. The address is hearmeout@slate.com. Hear Me Out is a podcast from Slate. The show is produced by Maura Currie. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations. Alicia Montgomery is the VP of Slate Audio. I'm your host, Celeste Headley. Until next time, speak your mind, but keep it open.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.